So we're just going to talk again through kind of figuring out what accelerated placement means in this context. And so for us, what it actually refers to is the placement of a student in an academically appropriate instructional setting with appropriate level curriculum that may include, for us, the process to ensure that a child receives early admissions into kindergarten or first grade early. There's also a process that we're talking about actually next week to accelerate a child who is already in school in a single subject, so for math acceleration or ELA acceleration, or a child who might qualify for whole grade acceleration, so from second to third grade. But today, our focus is really about that early entrance piece, so that first bullet around children entering kindergarten or first grade early. The purpose of our early admissions process is to identify and serve the few highly advanced students who require this comprehensive academic acceleration. So we need to really kind of think through, again, that multiple measure, a really comprehensive way to think through how we use those multiple data points to arrive at a decision for students who may be eligible. It's also intended to support students who are evaluated to be exceptional in aptitude, cognitive reasoning, academics, school readiness, and also motivation, which we find are key factors in student success, especially if we're thinking about moving on to a grade that's different from that one that their chronological age dictates. So early admission to kindergarten, so we're going to talk about both, is the admission to kindergarten of a student who will not be 5 before or on September 1st of the school term or school year. So if we're talking about next year, we're talking about a student not being 5 on or before September 1st, 2021. And this also means that the student is admitted prior to the dates established in the school code based on what we think are his or her readiness to attend school. So we're able to make those decisions based on data to allow a student to enter kindergarten early. Early admission to first grade is also an option. So I know that there are some families here for whom they're considering also early admission to first grade. So for first grade admission, we're looking at a student who's assessed for readiness, may have attended a non-public school, but continued his or her education at that school through kindergarten, was taught in kindergarten by an appropriately certified teacher, so that is important, and will be 6 on or before December 31st. Or, just as we talked about before, is admitted prior to the dates established in the school code based on, again, our assessments of readiness for him or her to attend school. And I'll pause there and check the chat and see if there are any questions before I move on. Okay, looks good for now. So there are some benefits to early entry for sure. So if we're thinking about a gifted student who would make this transition at some point in their career anyway, early entrance really allows us to think about how to position the students to really kind of develop those stable friendships early on. It also avoids interruption of curriculum because the early entrance kind of sets them up for the rest of their elementary and middle school and high school career. It also, as some of you indicated, promises greater intellectual stimulation for students who would otherwise be bored. And we really want to think about a really good match for readiness in that child. So if they really need challenge, or we can really kind of think about promoting growth, we want to make sure that we're providing an opportunity to do so, and that could be a benefit for students. So there are many considerations in terms of a student who is eligible for early admission. So as we'll talk about a little bit, there is a process around the assessment that we look at. And so there are a number of different domains that are really important for us to probe to determine a student's readiness for early entrance or early admissions. So we obviously want to look at cognitive abilities, and this means a child's verbal ability, nonverbal ability, a working memory, ability to really kind of approach novel problems and engage in problem solving, both visually and verbally. We obviously want to look at academic ability. So not just what they're doing in terms of their pre-K experience or their kindergarten experience now, so that mastery, but also exposing them to end of kindergarten and end of first grade tasks to make sure that they actually have the aptitude to be successful should they enter kindergarten or first grade early. We also tend to look at motor development because that's a critical skill as we're thinking about kindergarten and first grade. So both fine motor and gross motor. And then just an overall approach to learning. So as we're thinking about hopefully observing your child in their current setting, how are they actually approaching their learning? Are they asking questions? Are they engaged in groups? So really thinking about how they are successful in that classroom setting already. And then we also want to think about social emotional skills. So making sure that students are really ready from a social emotional standpoint to think about being with a classroom that may be filled with students and that is filled with students that are perhaps a year above their current age level. So what is this process? So essentially there are two levels to the process. So we're thinking about assessment. And what actually happens first is the district assessment team will complete grade level curriculum-based assessments in both literacy, which includes writing often, and comprehension, and mathematics, computation, and concepts. So this team, and I think a member might be here. Michelle, are you here by chance? I think I saw you a little bit.
Yes, I am.
Yes. So Michelle is a part of our wonderful team who does or completes those first level assessments alongside another wonderful pre-K teacher in the district. So Michelle, feel free to stop me and interrupt and add as we're going along. So this wonderful team assesses students and their ability to really master both skills in their current grade, but also really probing, again, as I was saying, end of kindergarten and end of first grade skills as we're thinking about that grade level that they're actually entering. So we're really looking for students to be able to read and comprehend grade level texts, that they have a really solid knowledge of number sense, that their addition and subtraction facts are key. And Michelle, is there anything that I might be missing?
No, I think you covered it all. We do, ask children to read. We ask questions. We have them either draw us a picture, add words to that. And we do some really nice things, I think, in the beginning to get them comfortable for being part of the screening. So we try and make them feel as comfortable as they can, so that they're able to show us what they know.
Thank you. And the team again does an amazing job. And this year, because we were obviously and still are in the midst of a pandemic, this level of assessment actually took place virtually. And from what I heard, it was really kind of a rich experience where we were able to get quite a bit of data in that space. And then we're also asking parents to complete the ages and stages questionnaire. And then upon review of those results, parents will then, or families will then be notified if the child is a candidate for acceleration. And if so, the child would move on to level 2. And the next level of assessment, because again, we want to make sure that we have multiple data points, is really kind of implementing what has been somewhat the standard for acceleration. So the IO acceleration scale has a number of different components, but what we want to look at is hopefully a student interview conducted by a school psychologist. If possible, we'd like to observe the student in an age-appropriate setting using an inventory that a trained District 97 observer would use to conduct prior to the end of the current school year, so it'd be this year. We again wanted to complete those parent rating scales as we just talked about. We would also want to get some information from the current teacher that is in the school year, this current school year. And then we'll also dive into some individual assessments. So what the school psychologist will be looking for is ability, aptitude, and achievement. So achievement really is within the space that they are learning now. Are they at the 90th percentile or above? So are they performing 90 at a rate that exceeds 90% of their peers, right? So, and then the second part though is that's also critical, which is why we do above grade level testing, is really thinking about aptitude. So their ability to problem solve it with when approached with or when presented with things that might be novel, what's their approach to kind of problem solving and figuring and grappling with those concepts. So when we're thinking about aptitude at that grade level that's above, we're looking at probably at or above the 75th percentile in terms of a score there. So the process. So the first key really is making sure that you're a resident of Oak Park in District 97. So we typically ask for just a copy of a lease agreement, deed, mortgage statement, or closing documents. That should be accompanied by 3 pieces of mail. It could be utility bills, bank statements, but what we want to make sure is that your address, name, and company's name is visible. Then once we receive that, we also want to make sure, actually the steps probably should be a bit reversed, but we'll open up our Google form shortly, which will be February 1st, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But that really kind of starts the process in which you can actually fill that out via Google form. And I'm going to show that to you briefly. So I'm going to come off of this screen, just so we can see what that looks like. So this is a kindergarten form. I just opened it up for just a second, so don't kill me, Dana. But it's really kind of basic information first, so your child's name, address, phone number, just information there, the attendance area, and then just a brief narrative around why you're applying for consideration for early entrance. And then we'll look at just, again, some background information, some personal history, general health, any illnesses, making sure we have the date of last physical, any special concerns that we should be aware of. And then as we're thinking about what kind of group experiences that your child has had they attended preschool, what the name of the preschool might be, the age, if they're in a daycare, what that daycare group might be, again, the age, and then just really some questions around what you think your child's greatest assets are in relationship with other children, what might be their greatest difficulties, what does your child like to do with you? And then we just have some questions around routines and activities. So is your child able to address himself or herself? If there's a general pattern of emotional expression, how the child reacts to new situations, any responsibilities that they hold, and how well they carry them out. And then just some quick basic questions around colors, shapes, can count to 100, simple addition and subtraction. I see a little typo there. Can generate and write at least 3 complete sentences unassisted. And as Michelle was alluded to earlier, is able to read simple level books, can complete 3 to 4 step directions, knows address, telephone number, uses pronouns and past tense correctly. And then we just wrap up that form. So that would actually be the first step. And then we would work to make sure that we are verifying residency. And then what we're asking is that those steps be completed between February 1st and April 15th for August 2021 for the start of the school year. So we will actually open up those Google Forms, and I'll show you exactly where they are in just a moment, on February 1st. And we will again accept them through the 15th. And that's how we know that we're going to actually start that level 1 process. We'll ask for residency, and then we'll go from there. So as you'll see in step 4, the district will set a time for their preschool observation if we can. We'll confirm your request to notify you of when testing will be scheduled, which will likely be after the 15th of April. But our goal is to make all of those decisions in July, and that we would notify families, because we know you have many moving parts and decisions to make sure that we are notifying you by August 1st. So I will pause here and check in the chat because I see some new questions. Okay. There's a question around how COVID will affect my child's ability to enter school early. So when we're thinking about that 90th percentile, because it's relative to peers, everyone has experienced the pandemic. So we're really kind of thinking about what that relative achievement level might be. When do they need to have mastery of these skills at the time of the evaluation, in March 2021 or by in August 2021? So while we're actually in the midst of the assessment period, so after April 15th is when we're looking at those skills, and that will be that first level in terms of measurement. Are reading and math skills required for kindergarten or first grade? Yes, for both, yes. And then selective mutism. So for that question, you can definitely connect with us kind of individually, because we will definitely kind of work that out. And as we kind of connect with our school psychologists, they have a wide range of skills and definitely understand what individual needs might be. So that is not an issue. What is a peer set comparison for a kid whose birthday is in September. So when you get to level 2, you'll see that the tests are actually normed by age. So once we get past that level 1 assessment piece, you'll be able to kind of get an idea of how students perform relative to their age. Another COVID question. Realize that it might be too early to know, but any sense of whether people were more likely to hold back kids from starting kindergarten this year, meaning that 2021 could have much larger class sizes. So that was a question that came up in the Google form. So I did ask, and right now that we know of, there are about 10 students that fall in that category. So right now we're not anticipating larger class sizes to that extent, but that's just kind of our projection for now. So thank you for those questions. And that's where we're at, right at the questions. So these are just the questions that I copied directly from the Google form. So hopefully I've answered those in terms of what the process is and the requirements. We are looking for some form of early reading skills. So students should be able to read and comprehend texts and hopefully be able to write about those texts. And the social milestones are really important. So we obviously want to make sure that students are able to maintain relationships with their peers, with adults, are able to follow directions, and really kind of engage with individuals. But again, we are casting and making sure that we're thinking about all different types of students. So this is just one area that we're looking for, just one piece of data. And that doesn't mean that that would impact anything else unless there was, something truly significant. So we're looking again at all different types of areas. So making sure that we still are casting a wide net for students to join the process. So my daughter will turn 5 on October 28th is what I think that meant to say. Is she eligible for the acceleration program? So yes. So I think there's a question about just late birthdays in general, or birthdays that are so close to that September 1st deadline. And historically we have proceeded with that process because we do want to kind of make sure that we're not passing up students who might qualify for the gifted and talented. So absolutely engage in the process. We'll start with that level 1 assessment and see what happens from there. Can the online application be accessed prior to March 1st or February 1st? I saw 2 different registration timelines listed. And this is actually a great question because there are 2 different processes. So there are that March 1st is actually for students who are already eligible or actually enrolled in school. So it might be a second grader who might want to access their grade content. And that would be that March 1st deadline. February 1st is for early admissions to kindergarten and first grade. So February 1st will be the registration timeline that you'd be looking at. And then there's a question about delayed entrance to kindergarten in fall of 2020. And I think I may have just answered that. So Dr. Kelly thinks that just the Board of Education did approve an adjustment to one of their policies that discusses early entry age for kindergarten. So holding back students would not apply. Is there an example of assessment that we can access? So no, we're not able to share the assessments because they are standardized and we do have to use them. But I don't know if Michelle, you want to give just a quick idea of what something might look like, generally speaking, without being specific, what that level 1 might look like.
Sure. So we start out having the children read a leveled reading story, and it has a list of questions for us to answer or to ask them, and they would answer. Like I said before, they would then write. We give them something to write about, and they'd write or draw a picture. With math, we look at doing some math concepts, so some adding and subtracting. There are some reading math problems, and what we do in the screening is we really try and help, and we want to see, like, if the child doesn't know how to do a certain aspect of a math problem or a test, we might show them how to do that and see how quick can they understand and learn, and are they able to show us that knowledge of the ability to learn the task. So we work with them on that as well. We do have some basic sounds, some phonics We do as well. We'll do some fine motor. We'll ask them to do some writing of alphabets, numbers, counting, identifying. We have sight words. We have them look at sight words and be able to read those sight words to us, not sounding the sight words out, but being able to actually look at it and say the sight words. I'm not quite sure. I can't remember how many sight words there are for kindergarten. There are quite a few for first grade that they need to know. And that's about it. And we have them draw pictures. We kind of like a journaling, like they would do in kindergarten. Journal, draw something, and then write it and tell us a little bit about it. It's fairly fun. It's usually about 45 minutes that we have the children with us. We try to just with that social aspect, that interacting back and forth. If they need breaks, we'll give them, a little break. If we can kind of see that this is frustrating, we might move on to something different and then come back. So I think that is kind of in the screening part. So we're basically screening prior to moving them to the next step of the assessment with the psychologist.
Thank you, Michelle. And in my former life, I was a school psychologist. So I can say, in terms of the assessments that are at level 2, they are individualized. We are looking for a student's ability to verbally comprehend information and give that information back to us. And also their ability to demonstrate visual spatial skills, which are kind of 2 of those benchmarks as we're thinking about overall cognitive abilities. If we're thinking about, again, academic achievement assessments, those are also individually administered. So the math could be written, it could be something that we're talking through a math problem. Same thing in terms of reading text and demonstrating understanding. So I see there's some questions coming in that I want to make sure I answer, but I also want to see if I can clear this screen so I can see people's faces if you're there. But just wanted to make sure I gave everybody a chance to write this down before I stop sharing my screen. So if you do have questions about the process, please contact us at earlyadmissions@op97.org. I'm going to stick around and obviously answer the questions that I see in the chat, but there could be something that comes up as you leave the session and, oh, I wish I had asked that. So this gives you an opportunity to obviously send us any questions that you may have. So I will give probably about 60 more seconds to write that down. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll throw it in the chat as well. And then just start answering questions from the chat. So again, it's earlyadmissions@op97.org. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and take a look at some of the questions. So I think we ended up with the example of the assessment. Then there's a question: if another elementary school aside from our district school in Oak Park has capacity to take on early kindergarten students, wouldn't be an option to send my child there if accepted to early admission. So we haven't had that as an issue. So all of the schools have the capacity to take on kindergarten students as a part of their process. So there wouldn't be kind of a threshold that one school would get past and they wouldn't be able to typically offer that kindergarten experience. So across the board at all of our elementary schools, and it hasn't been my experience since we've been doing this, that we can accommodate your neighborhood school. There's also a question. My son is turning 6 in September. We deferred this decision last year to keep him in person Montessori this year. My thought was that all of the first grade students will be behind normal benchmarks from COVID, so this would be the right time to try to have them try for first grade. Is that factoring into your decision making for the first grade standards? So we're taking a close look at our data. So we've done benchmarking this year using our common assessments and are continuing. We actually started up our benchmarking this year, and we're not noting a significant difference. However, as we're kind of saying before, all of these things, whether you talk about percentile, we're talking about students performing relative to other students. But I do just want to make sure that we note that we haven't seen, based on our assessments, the COVID learning loss that hasn't been mitigated by this point. There's also a question, why are they tested on concepts that they will learn in kindergarten? My son misses a deadline by 8 days, and this seems unreasonable for them to have to read and talk or read and recognize sight words. And my daughter, who's currently in kindergarten, just started those concepts. So this is still a part of the Accelerated Placement Act. So what we're looking for, and that's why kind of those the achievement and aptitude go hand in hand, because this is still considered acceleration. So we have to make sure that we're allowing for students to demonstrate mastery of both their grade level or their pre-K, if they're looking to kindergarten, or their kindergarten level skills, they're looking at first grade, because that tells us that this is concept, the kindergarten is something that perhaps they're beyond. And then we test aptitude, the Iowa test or the Iowa score, Iowa test for scale actually demands that we really kind of think through aptitude. So aptitude is about above grade level skills. So when we're thinking about students grappling and really having a strategy to figure out what might be next, we have to make sure that we're setting students up for success as they enter those accelerated grades. It sounds like that was the same question. The average class size for Oak Park kindergarten classes, we try and keep our class size fairly low in the early grades. So I would say anywhere from 15 to 18 students would be my best kind of guess for you right now. But again, we don't see anything over 20 often in those kindergarten classes. Are reading and math skills required for entry into kindergarten? Yes, they are kind of, we talked a little bit about that. So do they have to test high on both aptitude and acceleration to be considered? So achievement, we would want to make sure that we're at that 90th percentile for their current grade level or current preschool level or kindergarten level. For aptitude, because we understand that like students are not going to have mastery of the kindergarten material, but we're looking at around that 75th percentile, just so that we understand that when we do place students in that grade, that they won't struggle with the content. Kindergarten was 2021. Okay, thank you. Just see if there are any other questions. If anyone wants to come off the mic, feel free. I've learned great wait time after doing quite a bit of these, so I will wait a bit. So I want to make sure we get all of your questions answered. Oh, you're very welcome for setting this. It's my pleasure to speak with all of you. And again, if you have any questions before or even after or during, please use early admissions at op97.org to ask any questions of us. My email is elofton@op97.org. I think I sent an invitation to many of you. So if there are any questions you have specifically for me, please feel free to contact me. And I'll wait just a few more minutes to see if there are any other questions in the chat. If not, I will be here. So thank you so much for joining us on a Wednesday evening. We appreciate you being here. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Michelle, for all of your help. And thank you, all of you, for inquiring about this process. We're really excited to meet your students and your children. So thank you, and have a great rest of your evening.
I'm sorry, I do have a question. I know you've asked, I know you've kind of answered this, but, and maybe it's getting lost in the text, but so you had answered that, yes, they should be at some type of reading level or math level, but this is my third child going into the system. And my oldest didn't know any sight words. She knew letters, she could count to 20, like she did the basic kindergarten readiness. So why would the expectation be that, you know, just because they're entering the grade a little bit earlier than the deadline, that they would have to know these sight words or be, you know, at a certain reading level or math skills already?
Yep. So that when we're talking about acceleration, it runs the gamut, right? So it could be those that missed that deadline by a couple of months, but it's also students who, you know, are entering a full year above. So we have to be consistent in kind of what we're asking. And so what the act really requires of us is to have a good understanding of achievement and aptitude. So that is why we do have to kind of stick to those measures.
Okay, so for example, if our child isn't, you know, we think he's kindergarten ready in the aspect of, he would pass the kindergarten readiness test, but he doesn't know any sight words. He doesn't count 1 to 100. Does that mean that there's like, we shouldn't even bother having applying, or what?
I think that I would still go through the process. I think that children surprise us all the time and make growth just incrementally and amazingly. So I would still go through the process.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Hi, question again. So the Iowa Acceleration Scale test and the kindergarten readiness test are 2 different tests.
Correct. Yeah. So the kindergarten readiness is really just to kind of get an idea for all students as they're coming in, what their skills are. But the Iowa Acceleration Scale really deals with acceleration. So if we're thinking about moving past a grade that would be indicated by the chronological age, we need to make sure that as we're making that decision that we're setting students up for success, and that we're also looking at multiple measures. So they are 2 different assessments, yes.
So they could technically not score well on kindergarten readiness and still go to kindergarten because they meet the age,
Absolutely.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I work at a high school, so all this is like, I have a 4-year-old, I'm like, what?
Absolutely, yeah. The kindergarten readiness just lets us know kind of
Where they are.
Where they are, yep.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay. If there aren't any other questions, I'll hang out for a bit. Otherwise, thank you so much and have a great day. Great night.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Hi.
Hello.
Ebony.
How are you?
So I had a question regarding the concept of gifted. So I wanted to kind of revisit that for a second to figure out just the definition and the overall outline of what gifted specifically means. So say, for instance, this is just in general. So I have 2 children, and I have one that I didn't work with at all, and I kind of that, because they're, in early childhood education, or, they're younger, things will kind of, create itself organically as far as education. And then I have another child that I've worked with since they were 2, and now they're 3 at a 2nd grade reading level, just because I've had the time, effort, and energy to put towards that. Does that necessarily make them gifted, or does that really play into, because for me personally, I don't necessarily think my youngest is gifted, but I've especially due to the time that we're in now, I've had a lot of opportunity in conjunction with my experience in early childhood education to work with her. And so, now it's not necessarily that she's gifted. It's just that, there's been a space created for her to create a love for learning and thrive in it, and then to be placed in a in an environment in which can facilitate that love for learning. And so I kind of just want to kind of revisit and touch base on what gifted specifically means. I know I'm in education, so a lot of times I've had parents come to me and say my child is gifted, and a lot of times this child isn't necessarily gifted, they're just easier to teach. And just because this child is easier to teach because they learn based off memorization opposed to mass or repetition, just because a student is easier to teach doesn't always necessarily mean that they're gifted. Just because it's easier for me as a teacher to teach them, I don't want to take accountability away from the teacher. And so I just want to kind of know your thoughts on that.
I think there are a number of different ways to demonstrate giftedness. So I think the one that we as a society have valued more is the one that kind of fits into our school model, right? So I think the capacity for a student to be able to receive what it is that you're giving, and then demonstrate that understanding, that deep understanding of 2nd grade school shouldn't be ignored, right? So I think giftedness is broad. It means so many different things. So I wouldn't discount the fact that with some support, a student was able to achieve at 2 grade levels beyond, or 3 grade levels, 4, right, beyond their age level. I don't think that that's anything that I would discount. and I understand how, like like giftedness is kind of an interesting type of term, because it can be a number of different things, but I would definitely move forward, and if this process makes sense for you, engage in it, hopefully.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you for you being amazing, as I've said before. I know we're going to close out soon, but for the record, you have.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Oops.
Hi.
Hi.
So I have a question about the requirements. So, you know, my daughter is, I mean, this is January, but she's gone through like her level 1 Bob books. And so she has the sight reading, and she can count up to 100 and can do some very basic addition. She does not enjoy writing at all. She doesn't even enjoy drawing. Like, she came home one day with a little black spot and said, "Polar bear in a snowstorm." Like, thanks, kid, thanks. Great. So when going through this, does she have to hit all of these, or can she hit like 75%? Or what happens if she is really advanced in reading, middling, I mean, slightly advanced in math, but like nothing there on the writing? Like, what happens?
So this is considered whole grade acceleration. So I think we'll obviously take into account all of that, right? So if there's some skills that really kind of we're curious about and want to move to level 2, we'll still do that. So I would still go through the process. You know, the team is there to kind of make those kind of broad decisions and kind of look at the whole profile of the student. But I do want to, it is whole grade. It is considered like a whole grade acceleration. So we are looking for, you know, reading and math.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then my second question has to deal with the social emotional. So she's in daycare right now, but I'm concerned that if you go in and you interview them with COVID, they're not really supposed to sit in group, right? Like there's kind of this problem of like, I mean, before COVID, she would tell me about her friends all the time. And I don't really get that anymore, because I know that they're trying to keep them safe.
Yep.
Is she going to get docked because of that, or how, like, what are you looking for? Especially emotionally in times of COVID.
Yeah. So I think that's why we kind of put that observation if possible. I think what we want to look for is just kind of in that setting, as it is she able to kind of manage her materials, manage herself? We're not necessarily looking for her to, you know, have groups around her, but just being able to engage with the instructor. So yeah, we know that this is a difficult time, and we may not actually be able to get into some daycare settings, or we may have to patch in remotely. So we know that that might be a step that we may not be able to complete. But we just want to kind of get a sense of how she maneuvers in that learning environment. I don't know if Michelle, if you want to pop back.
I was just going to say, we do have parents fill out the ages and stages social emotional questionnaire too. So that's your place to also write into some of those things that we may not see and that you see in the home setting and all of that stuff. So that is, you know, that is something else too that we do for social emotional as well.
Yeah, great point.
I have a quick question. I'm not Carla, that's my wife, but I have a quick question. Does proximity to the cutoff date factor in at all? For example, if your child happens to be, you know, a week different or a week past or a week early, does that factor in at all to your evaluation, or is it purely subjective?
No, it's based on, for at least on level 2, kind of they use the age-based norms. So to make sure that it's kind of fair. So and kind of cued into that age group. But the level 1 protocol is pretty much the same regardless of student age, because we want to make sure that we're, you know, giving everyone a shot.
Thanks.
Of course.
I had a quick question. When it comes to ability-based learning, so if you, and I want to kind of play back into what I believe her name is Heather spoke about, if you have a student that is, you know, at a kindergarten reading level but a first grade math level, but a preschool reading level. The ability to meet every student where they are and to bring them to where they are. What is, more or less your or the district's approach to, really honing in on individualized learning in the sense of, this is your age and this is, the grade level that you're in, but you may not necessarily be there. And so how can we meet you wherever you are in whatever category that is, and to bring you up, accordingly, and also in the best comfortable and appropriate way, according to the student at hand.
It's a great question. So we have enrichment specialists at every school, and a part of their work is to really kind of push into the early grades, so K through 2 and actually 3rd grade, to kind of give that support. So a student needs enrichment in math or in ELA, they have a support there to make sure that we're providing that. But alongside that, our teachers are skilled at differentiation. So when we see that there's enrichment needed in a particular area, we want to make sure that we're also providing those opportunities for students just naturally as a part of the classroom. So.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little more? Because I'm one of the people with the September birthday, and that's just my whole concern. Like, I don't care what grade he's in, I just don't want him to be really bored redoing kindergarten. So.
So yeah, there's at the base level, like the kindergarten teachers are so skilled in really kind of making sure that when we at the beginning, beyond the KRT, we're doing tons of kind of assessments at the beginning, benchmark assessments, to see where those talents lie, where students may need some additional support. So we're getting that information in the first 3 weeks of school. And then teachers use that to make sure that they're providing that additional support for students or additional enrichment for students. But as I was saying, we also have enrichment specialists at each school. I think the larger schools have 1.5. And a lot of their main work is really kind of pushing into those kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade classrooms to make sure that they have that material, that they have those techniques, strategies to really make that a robust learning space for students who may need challenge in different areas. Yep.
I keep saying it's my last question, but I promise you this is it. I think you promised this is it. So with, I know a lot of times when I am in conferences with my oldest teachers, I always give this analogy of, I know when I taught at Delphi, the one of the pillars of the school was there's only 100% pass. So if you walk outside and 10% of your car is missing, then that means there's not a wheel. And if you don't have a wheel, then you can't drive. So whatever you're learning, it's so important to get 100% of it before you go on, to make sure that there's full comprehension, and that comprehension can be applied towards life. And so I guess one of my biggest questions always is that how is that ensured in more specifically early education? Because what happens a lot of times is that, what I've seen just in parenting is that there's a lot of holes that can happen. And so, she comes home with homework and I'm like filling in holes because, she didn't fully understand addition, and then we're on to subtraction, and then we're on to multiplication and then division. And so there's these skip gradients in which, you can constantly kind of have to backtrack as a parent, and I'm sure it's obviously as teachers. And so is there any structure put in place to make sure that that there are no skip gradients, so that, if you're learning letter sounds, that's mastered before you get to, or you're learning letter recognition, that's mastered before you get to letter sounds, and letter sounds is mastered before you get to phonetic, comprehension, and then ongoing to reading. And so, I guess the question more or less is asking, is there, infrastructures put in place or systems put in place to make sure that there are 100% comprehension and application, even starting at, the ECE level, the early childhood education level?
So we, through our multi-tiered systems of supports, and also kind of through the structure of our day, have intervention periods. So for English language arts, there's an intervention block built in. For math, there's also an intervention block built in because we want to make sure that students have that foundation to move from concept to concept. So that's something that's kind of already naturally a part of the student's schedule. So as they're teaching kind of their mini lessons or kind of exposing students to different ideas and concepts, they still have that time set aside during the day to kind of see as we're going through kind of our assessments and noting that there may be an area that we need to address again, that there's time already built in the day to really kind of think about those intervention groups. So, and same with enrichment too. So really kind of thinking about the full spectrum of what students might present. Thanks. Any other questions? These are great. Okay. Well, I can't thank you enough for hanging around with me and chatting about this. Is probably one of my favorite times of the year because I love getting ready for this and checking in and seeing our youngest learners really thrive. So thank you so much for taking this time and have an amazing rest of your afternoon or evening. It's night, evening. Bye-bye.